Hello and welcome. I'm Lisa Marie Meshtag. This is a Voxafrica special. Today I'll be in conversation with Kanayo Awani. She is the Managing Director for Intra African Trade Initiative with the African Export-Import Bank. Kanayo, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So I want to start by asking you about the inaugural Intra Africa Trade Fair. It's the first of its kind on the continent. How important is a trade fair such as this?
Well, let me start by saying that when we conceptualize our intra-African trade strategy, we hinged it on 3.5 pillars. One, we say to create, connect, deliver, and measure. Under the create pillar, we really what we wanted to do was to, expand production capacity, right? Value addition. Create productive capacity, because Africa must produce what it can sell to its neighbors. The other was to connect. We saw there was a disconnect between the buyers and sellers. In that space also, we realized that there was inadequate or lack of trade and market information. As I often say, the Kenyans don't know they can buy raw hide from Burundi. That information is not easily available, but they buy it from New Zealand. Nigerians don't realize they can buy pharmaceuticals, quality pharmacy from Egypt, but they buy it from everywhere else. So there was lack of adequate information on where to source materials, where to sell, what the rules of trade within Africa is among countries, who to partner with. And we saw a gap that we needed to bridge. So the connect pillar is essentially to connect buyers and sellers, and that's the pillar under which the trade fair falls in. There's a deliver pillar, which is to deliver efficient delivery and distribution capacities. And of course, there was the measure. The measure is an ancillary pillar because we actually want to measure our intervention, especially as it relates to informality of trade, to measure informal trade. So we thought that under the Connect pillar, and the trade fair is one of the initiatives that we are pursuing under the broad intra-African trade strategy. But in the trade fair, there was an opportunity for us to connect buyers and sellers as a way to build trade information. And so that was important, so that Africans know that they can actually easily source goods, services, and even investments from the neighboring countries.
A key topic of discussion on the sidelines of the conference is the implementation and the ratification of the African Continental Free Trade Area. How important was this trade fair in helping that process?
The one thing that I know about is the enthusiasm. And one of the reasons why we decided to make intra-African trade a major strategy is that we wanted to ride on the momentum and enthusiasm of the political leaders, And this becomes the first delivered instrument under the CFTA, because we know that African countries and leaders want to do it, right? Many of them are just going through the process.
The political will is there.
So the process is what is happening right now. So we're confident with all the debates and discussions going on that many more countries we know are already in the process. As you probably know, almost 50 have signed up the agreements. The ratification process is what is more delayed in a manner of speaking. But I do think that by the time the 22 African countries, we get to the 22 African countries, which the AU is optimistic, by the next year's heads of state meeting, the agreement comes into force. And it's a matter of time when others will join. But I do think that this trade fair has been it's been an eye-opener in a lot of sense, in many ways, and that many countries will look to signing up or ratifying, as the case may be.
Africa's largest economy, Nigeria, is yet to sign. What do you think is holding them back?
Process.
Do you think that they eventually will sign?
So, I think it's just process. Most countries have different processes. Engagement of stakeholders, engagement of the associations, I think it's just a matter of process and it's a matter of time.
The continent accounts for less than 3% of world trade. How can Africa mitigate against the US-Asia trade wars that are taking place once the AfCFTA is eventually realized?
Rather than use the word mitigate, I will say it's an opportunity. Right. I have heard, I was in China, I think about 2 months ago, actually in September, to be exact. I met a lot of companies that are looking to expanding their business into Africa, just simply taking advantage of the fact that, well, I wouldn't say advantage, but because to hedge their bet against the uncertainties of what's happening between the China and America at this point in time and the tax wars, to have new markets open, to have new agreements and new arrangements opened up for them. For us, it's an opportunity. However, you have to understand that our trade fair is about intra-African trade. Although it's an intra-African trade, you'll have seen across the exhibition areas a lot of some non-African exhibitors as well, including China, including Japan, right? The Gulf countries. Because we also realize that as much as we want to trade within ourselves, but we also want to build a productive capacity, as I mentioned to you, and we have to buy investment goods currently from outside of Africa, So the trade will happen between Nigeria and, between Africa and the rest of the world. It doesn't rule it out entirely because we know that there are goods that we must buy from outside of Africa.
You mentioned lack of information as being one of the reasons why intra-Africa trade is so low, but the African Development Bank says that Africa needs 130 to 170 billion US dollars a year to help close its infrastructure gap. Where can this money come from to help close the gap?
Let me put it differently. The current stock of infrastructure today, at least that's what we believe in Afreximbank, carries $1 trillion of trade. The current stock of infrastructure. So while we think infrastructure is important, that there is a deficit, right? We believe that if the current stock of infrastructure is carrying so much trade from Africa to outside of Africa at 85% of it, then there must be something much more at stake rather than infrastructure. There's no doubt of the fact that there are infrastructural issues, but think about it. I think another 40% of the statistic goes to informal trade. How is the informal trade being carried? So we think there are issues around informality of trade that's not allowing for policy intervention. There are issues about lack of information that are also militating against the trade that could otherwise happen, right? So we can't tackle about infrastructure. However, there are institutions, like you mentioned, like African Development Bank, that are actually working very hard to see that these gaps are being closed. We ourselves are also involved in providing some sort of intervention in that area. For instance, one of the things that we are working on is a study on infrastructure carrying trade study. And what that means is that we're trying to review where even the secondary routes, do an analysis of the secondary routes that are carrying trade. Remember, I just talked about informality, that there are other channels that trade is happening, although they're unrecorded. If we analyze that informal trade routes or those secondary routes, then we present proposals to partners to be able to see how we can close those gaps, in infrastructure. That's one of the things we're trying to do in Afreximbank, to study the trade carrying infrastructure routes. So let me give you an example. There's a lot of trade that is going on between Ethiopia, out of Ethiopia. People will usually think that the route out of Ethiopia is Djibouti, but there are other routes through Sudan, for instance.
So is it about finding out what's really taking place?
Because the trade will drive infrastructure, the infrastructure of capital that is required. If you take shipping, for instance, there's a lot of clamor for sea links, but you have to have a trade that will navigate those links. Is it available? Is it available in the quantum in which you can then make an intervention? If you carry crude oil from Nigeria to, say, Cameroon, what then comes back? Those are the kind of conversations that you have to have, to be able to see where, what exactly and where you need to intervene. But no doubt about that, infrastructure is an issue. And we will, and we are doing things with other financial institutions involved in that space to tackle them.
What is the bank's role in harnessing and using the blue economy? Is that something that is one of the pillars that you have included?
We have, and you cannot be working in Africa without having we have a blue economy strategy that talks to the maritime, and the tourism, and that's some of the things that we're doing. In a few years ago, we introduced what we call the Contour, construction and tourism related relay facility. And that was essentially supposed to support the provision of first-class hotels as a way to promote tourism in Africa and around our, blue economy-focused countries. Very recently, also, we introduced another medical facility we call Construction and Medical Tourism Facility, again to support first-class medical facilities as a way to promote tourism in healthcare. When you think about how much Africans, have to spend in foreign exchange to go and acquire medical services abroad, so we try to bridge, and those are the kind of initiatives that we are, intervening with in some of the island countries. So if we go to Cape Verde, for instance, we're developing and intervening in resorts for leisure tourism. In Nigeria right now, we're also working on a center of excellence facility, for healthcare, in Lagos. Ways to promote blue economy. We're also working on port development, development of ports across Africa, to promote the maritime trade, as it were, because a lot of the trade Intra African right now is going on by air, which is probably more expensive and inefficient.
What will be the plan for the 16 African countries that are landlocked to help them access more port services, to be able to use those services? Is there something that will be in place?
One of the main things that we're doing with landlocked, a lot of them are using their neighboring countries. There's really nothing much there are some structural issues with countries, whether you're an island country or you're a landlocked country. There's just structural rigidities that's, you just have to work around them, But one of our initiatives in that area is to support landlocked countries and the trade between them. Is what we call an Interstate Transit Guarantee Scheme. That's what that does, is when goods are moving within the landlocked countries, is to ensure that they don't pay duties in those countries until they get to their destination. So Afreximbank will provide a regional guarantee, to support trade in and across landlocked countries without them having to pay duties as they're moving across, because then that increases the cost of transport within the countries. So that's something that will help reduce the strain or the cost of transportation within landlocked countries.
I quote a famous quote that you've said, "If not us, who? If not now, when?" How important is it to you that Africa is in control of its own destiny?
We don't have choices in that matter. We want to move away from being aid countries to trade countries. One of the things that we'll do, you will have heard of our president talk a lot of times about re-engineering as the strategy of not manufacturing at home, of not trading with your neighbors, to ensure that we actually do that. Manufacture at home and trade with our neighbors, because we've seen countries succeed doing that.
What does the bank hope to achieve in the next 5 years? You have Strategy 2021.
There's a reason we called it Impact 2021, Africa Transform. We consider ourselves as people who have won lotteries, uniquely positioned to help make a transformation of Africa, to help support the transformation of this continent in any way, to contribute to change the continent using our mandate, being a policy bank. So those overarching strategy are hinged on intra-African trade, industrialization and export development, which is a way to structurally transform African countries and to be a leader in trade finance. And that's what we aim to do. In the intra-African trade space, our mandate is to grow intra-African trade and align ourselves with the African Union objectives to grow intra-African trade to at least 24% by 2021.
How important is the creative economy? We had conferences earlier this week where you had stars from the world of sport, film, TV and music sharing their stories of how it was very difficult for them to get the funding that they needed. How important is it to the bank to promote those industries?
Very important, and that's because it's also aligned with our own. We understand that the creative industry is probably Africa's biggest exports, whether it's Intra African or Extra African, right? It just aligns with our own strategy to promote trade between Africa and the rest of the world, between Africa and Africans in diaspora. You know, in that sense, we in the intra-African trade space have a strategy on the creative sector to support the creative economy. You know, so that they can, you know, to help it grow, to help it as an important service that Africa is selling to, you know, within itself and to the rest of the world. You know, so that's important for us in a nutshell, and the reason, you know, it was important to start a conversation, you know, during the conference, is because we ourselves are aligned with that strategy. Everything that is being discussed are things that we're trying to pursue. You know, trying to hone our own strategy on the creative industry. You know, that's why we had a Creative Africa Exchange Summit. You know, to be able to see how we can, you know, pitch into the conversation and to see where the real needs are to support the creative economy.
We currently have what's being deemed in the West as the migrant crisis. Thousands of economic migrants are risking their lives to get to Europe with the hope of better economic opportunities. How will the African Continental Free Trade Area help those people within their respective countries?
You know, what the free trade does for us is to help us also enhance capacity for production using scale, value chain, expanding the value chain activity, expanding regional value chains. What will create jobs on this continent is industrialization. We have to begin to add value. We have to expand the value chains on the continent, and people can stay back. You know, so long as we're selling commodities in their own forms, so long as we're selling natural resources in their own forms, we create less jobs. The jobs overseas, and that's what people are going over to go and take. You know, other than that, you continue to face the challenges of lack of employment at home. You know, Africans must diversify their economies, must industrialize, must expand their sources of earnings to move away from either mono commodities or primary commodities to adding value to them so that they can create jobs and hopefully create youth employment. And I think that's important. But the free trade area does simply that, in the sense that it creates one market, you know, of over 1 billion people. You know, it helps you to expand your value chains. It creates scale, you know, for you to produce at home. You know, it creates regional value chains such that if you're making if you have an automotive assembly plant, you know, in Egypt, the spare parts or the fan belts or seat belts can be coming from Tunisia. You know, the expanded regional value chain is what will create jobs.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you very much.